It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen with you. And Logan, we got nothing to talk about. No news, nothing significant since we last sat down at these here microphones.
Yeah, I mean, we're a little late to the party, but some interesting stuff happened with the team.
Yeah, just to say the least. Hope you guys enjoyed the bonus episodes that we pulled from my radio show, which, of course, the Hoffman Show, 4 to 7 each and every day on the Team 980, where I kind of laid out my thoughts, my big, long monologue that I had written, and then our chat with David Aldridge as well. But Logan, no one's heard your reaction to the news yet, so we'll get into that and some of the kind of the more important high-level things that are still relevant a few days later, and start looking ahead to what the Josh Harris era is going to look like. As of course, the news we're talking about is that Daniel Snyder has agreed to sell the Commanders for a record $6 billion, according to multiple reports. Just cleaning up the loose ends, Logan. Like, it's a non-exclusive deal as of right now, so theoretically another buyer could come in and bid higher. No one really expects that to happen. It's still got to be approved by the league, but considering who the people in this group are, specifically Harris is the lead bidder, who's already an owner in other major sports leagues, there should be no problems with the vetting and the finances. No one's anticipating any hiccups there. The biggest questions are, in terms of like any legal or remaining legal questions around the lawsuits that are and investigations that are into the team and Dan and indemnity. And those are either big or small questions, depending on which reporter you ask and who their sources are, et cetera, et cetera. But on the whole, the distilled version is Dan has agreed to sell the team, and he's agreed to sell the team to Josh Harris. So when you found that out, when you saw that news last week, what was your reaction?
I mean, I think there's a lot of fans that are rightfully so very excited about it. I was just kind of like, it was inevitable at some point. If it wasn't this year, it was going to be next year. Like, I think there was too much stuff going on around the team with the other owners and Dan, the legal stuff. Like, it just, like this was an inevitability. And so I'm happy for the fan base. I think, a lot of them have a fair amount of animosity towards Dan. And I think when you look at the team's history and since Dan's ownership, I think there's a lot of justification for that in certain instances. I don't know Dan personally, so I don't want to speak on that. But just when you look at the history and the events of the team, I get why fans are excited. So, I'm excited for the team too. All change isn't necessarily good change, but I think, under Dan's leadership, you've kind of got to see, much like you would with a head coach, you get to see what this organization was going to be. And just how sometimes a coach's tenure runs a little thin. Like, I think that's kind of what was going on with Dan here. So, from a football standpoint, and obviously there's the legal stuff. So I think this is the right thing. I think fans should be excited. I'm excited. And I'm just kind of, waiting like everybody else to hear, more about Josh Harris and that group and what their plans are, and, wait until the sale's finalized.
Yeah. I would say two things. Like, one, the off the field stuff is so much more important in the grand scheme of everything. But even if you put that aside for the moment, like, you got 25 years basically of football, and it's capped out at like the RG3 2012 team that you were obviously a part of as well, which didn't win a playoff game. Part of that was obviously Robert's injury. But like they've won 2 playoff games. I think it's just one under Dan's stewardship. Like, it's just, he's clearly not good at putting the right people in place to run a football operation that's going to win games. So purely on a football level, like, this is I think an exciting time. Nevertheless, the personal misconduct of, allegedly Dan and people that worked underneath him, that's been widely reported in a number of outlets. So if that's how you run your football team, on the off the field stuff, to me, you don't get to own a football team. And obviously, I think for the fans that are much more, and I would say also the two are related. But for fans that just want to see a successful product on the field, that's like, this is great news, because you're going to get someone. And actually, let's jump into this a little bit now, in terms of Josh Harris and who he is and the way he's run. I'm much more familiar with the Philadelphia 76ers and the way they've run than the New Jersey Devils, which he's also a part of. Mm-hmm. But with the Sixers, like, they're a premier franchise, the way they run things. Like, he pays people And that gets you the best of the best. And I'm sure as you've talked to friends around the league and people in the building, like it's not exactly a secret that, especially before Jason Wright got to town, and when Bruce was running things, and the people that ran the team before Bruce under Dan, like this is a team that was cheap. Like they underpaid everyone for everything, and thus you have people that aren't the most qualified, aren't the best of the best, and the good ones leave. And I think that's the encouraging thing to me from like a football standpoint about Josh Harris is they're gonna spend money. Like you're not gonna have scouts that are underpaid and looking to leave and not be able to retain the good ones, because he's gonna hire whether it's immediately or a couple of years down the road after the Rivera era plays out. If Ron has some success this year and it takes a little longer until he ultimately steps aside or whatever, however that ends, like he's gonna hire a really high level executive to run things on the football side and let that person do their job and give them the resources to do it. And like, that's all you can ask for from an owner once you get past the basic decency stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's just like good leadership and good management, and I think like there's a history there of him doing that in a professional sports environment. I think that's encouraging. I think one of the things about Dan that was always a little bit flat for him was that he never seemed to kind of adopt whatever kind of business acumen and professionalism he had in his business sphere of getting good people around him, smart people around him. He always seemed to struggle with that on the football side of it. So, I think that those things, like a track record, a history of being able to identify talented people and then being willing to pay them. I think that's something, you mentioned that Dan has not always been willing to do. And I remember having a conversation with our equipment guy, and, I said, they get in a conference every year and say, how much what's the standard going rate? And he was like, I'm the 34th highest paid equipment guy in the NFL when I was here in Washington. So that means there was an assistant that was making more than him at some spot, and he was the head guy here. So he's managing all of the logistics of the clothes and the laundry, the orders. He's, and he's the 34th paid guy. We didn't have like an HR department when I was there, like, because it was like basically the woman at the front desk to work with Miss BJ. So I just look at that and I say to myself, like, those were some decisions that probably could have been handled differently. Like I told this to Kime recently, like my wife, I played here for 6 years, had not been in the building until we did a trick or treat event with Ron Rivera, as a staff here, and so like just thinking about some of those things that I got to experience in other places, like the familiar environment of Atlanta, like San Francisco, just how they try to take care of you in any way possible. Like they were willing to take that extra step to make you feel comfortable and welcome and help you with your moving and all these types of things. And that just wasn't the case here. And, everyone wants to, moan and complain about the facilities. And when you look at the facilities compared to other NFL places, they're approximately the same. There's not a huge drastic difference in terms of what's available to the athletes here. I think the thing that makes the difference is just kind of that personal touch, and being willing to kind of invest in the environment and the culture from the financial side, which was something that when I did go to different organizations that I got to see kind of be handled differently. And I thought, wow, like that's an effective way, just as an example, like they paid for childcare when I went to Atlanta. So if my wife came to a game, she could drop my son off and my daughter at the childcare and come watch the game and hang out with the other parents, other teammates, and that's something that wasn't a feature here in Washington. And it's not a huge thing, but it goes a long way. Like talking to some of the guys that I train now who are in the NFL, like that's a huge part of making them feel welcome in this environment that's, so characterized by free agency and this kind of impermanence. Like those little things go a long way. So I'm hoping that Harris, with his experience with the Sixers and the Devils, like understands that. And it seems like he does. And not only is willing to invest in the high level, personnel, like you were discussing, Craig, but also say, I'm going to invest in the players and the culture here and build something that people are excited to be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know anything about Josh Harris in terms of like his, like who he is as a person. And I don't say what I'm about to say to like just dump on Dan for the sake of dumping on Dan, but like Dan is known to be an awkward, like kind of impersonal person.
Sure.
And he actually didn't have a lot of business. Like his business success was extremely limited and timed well that allowed him to buy the team along with some other things. And like he's had mostly other business failures. He kind of got, he rode the best asset you can arguably own in America, an NFL team, to the wealth that he's about to accumulate when the check clears, and Harris ultimately buys the team. But like those things trickle down to the organization, right? Like, he's not hiring people who have an emphasis on personal touch because that's not his thing.
Right.
And he doesn't necessarily understand the importance of that compared to what other owners, Arthur Blank, who's got a much more personal touch. And like, look, these are all, I'm not trying to like glorify billionaires because a lot of them have a lot of issues in a lot of ways. That's the nature of being a billionaire. There's always stories. There's always this, there's always that. But like Arthur Blank, by billionaire standards, has a pretty good personal touch from the stories that I've heard and players that have played there. And he cares about that stuff. And so it's not a surprise that Atlanta has that. You've talked about how Kyle has tried to, like, he made those mistakes earlier in his career where he was very impersonal, and he's tried to learn from those. And so it doesn't surprise me that those were, more emphasized in getting the best out of players in San Francisco.
Well, and also, like, I think it's just important. Like, one of the reasons Kyle took that job in San Fran is because the ownership there said, like, we are willing to be a first-class organization. We're willing to invest in the nice charter plane. We're willing to invest in the nice hotels, the childcare, the resources, the strength and conditioning, like whatever you need, whatever you feel we need, you and John Lynch, to get us to the next level, we're going to do it. And, talking to Kyle and listening to him talk about it since in some podcasts that he's done, like, I think that's something that he probably learned from here and his experience with his dad is like, is when his dad came in, that's what Dan said. And then obviously it didn't turn out that way. And so that ownership support of the coach, of the GM, I think it is, like as a young player, I didn't see the significance of it, but the more I've been around other teams and seen more stuff, the more important it gets. So I do think that, like, that's a great example of a guy who in an organization that said, we invested in the right guy in Kyle, we invested in the right guy in John, who are both very charismatic people, you know what I'm saying? Like they get how important that is. And they made an effort to make it better. So I think that is, you need the support of that ownership. And I'm not sure that always, another thing that I was just thinking about is, like, everyone talks about, oh, they botched the Sean Taylor thing. They did this. I got to meet the team that did the Sean Taylor thing. A lot of them, like, I want to say, the majority of them are just out of college. Right. And the reason they're just out of college is because the salary here is not conducive to people making a lot of to getting an experienced person in that position. So you can hem and haw as a fan and all you want. And, I feel bad for those kids, right? Because they are kids, they're 22, 23, 24 years old, managing a big presentation like that, but they don't have any experience. There's no one on the staff that's experienced enough. There's no one here that was a fan of the team that understands how important that is. So I think all that stuff it kind of goes back to just not understanding the value of people and the value of quality people. And whether or not he can identify that, I don't know, because I don't know Dan, but I do think that's something significant that it shows up constantly here in this organization.
Totally. And I'll give, Ron and Jason some level of credit that they kind of came in and were like, hey, this ain't it. Like, we got to do better. And, Dan has always kind of picked his one guy, whether, it was Bruce for a decade, was the guy who was like Dan's guy, and Bruce got whatever he wanted, which was obviously a huge mistake. But like when Ron came in, it's like, okay, well, whatever Ron says goes. And so some of the stuff has gotten better the last couple of years. And now,
I think like Fred always talks about how, Ron was brought in to change the culture. And I think he's done a great job of that. Like, I think about the Halloween thing, and I'm on the media side. I'm a part-time guy. I'm invited to that. Got to bring my kids in, got to walk around the building, got to meet, the Martys. They're handing out candy to my kid. Like, that's a special thing, man. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's significant. And I think stuff like that is directly correlated to Ron or Ron's wife, whoever put that on. But I think that is that I look at that and I say, wow, that's something that, when I was here for 6 years, that never happened.
Yeah, no, 100%. And what they've run into now is, like, they're still running into some of the stuff, I'm sure, financially, where Dan doesn't necessarily want to. And obviously things have been so topsy-turvy and unsettled the last couple of years. It puts a complication on everything. But also, you mentioned the facilities. Like, now they are truly running up against the limitations of their space and things like that, as opposed to hey, we're not even maximizing what we have. Because like there is a huge difference now as some of the teams, we reference Chicago and Minnesota all the time that have these incredible large spaces to practice in, and they have the video projection screens where they can kind of do walkthroughs in a classroom setting, which helps. It's on the gray area of the rules of how legal that is. But
Sure.
like it's in the white, so to speak, because it's allowed and teams do it. But it's a classroom setting where they get to do walkthroughs, like stuff that's incredible. And that's just more of like time space evolving, and the Commanders haven't yet gotten to that level of upgrade versus like, oh, they're too cheap to. What is the kind of the chronology of the to-do list here? Because it's one thing to say like, okay, the practice facility or the stadium or practice fields or whatever other things you might have in your mind is the most important thing for the ownership to do. But there's also the logistics of it. Because I had made the argument on the show last week that the practice facility was actually more important than the stadium because that's where everyone goes to work every day. And while certainly the fans need a great place to go to, if there's a winning team, like, there's a little bit of like, hey, RFK is a dump, but it's our dump. And like people will go. People would go to FedEx if the team was awesome.
Yeah.
And so if they can create an atmosphere where the team's awesome, cool. But then Michael Phillips came on and was like, hey, I hear you, but they got to figure out where the stadium is because that's going to determine what kind of facility it is. Are they going to do everything in DC, players living in DC, practice facility there, stadium there, same kind of thing, whether it's DC, Woodbridge, Loudoun, Landover? Do they mix and match kind of like they have now, like a lot of teams do? So I think there's a lot of questions in terms of importance, but logistically also, Logan, like what's kind of the process, and what would you be telling Josh Harris to think about in terms of big important steps to take when he officially takes over?
Well, I think just based on that feedback, what I would say is that the location is probably going to be the most significant, right? Because like really, legitimately, I'm not just saying this because I played here for 6 years, but the practice field is probably fine. And what I mean by that is that location, while the real estate there is very expensive, there's plenty of space to put another building if you needed to. You could put a hard cover and have an indoor field there. Like there's plenty of space. So in terms of location, you don't really need to be frantically searching for a new spot just to search for a new spot. However, like to your point, I think it's really important that like if you are going to try and make it a practice facility and the stadium in the same location, like you need to kind of determine that first, right? So, the one thing that I've been hearing a lot of fans kick around, a lot of analysts kick around is like, we want it to be at RFK again, right? And I would love that. That would be great. I think that would be great for fans. It'd be great for the nostalgia. It'd be great for kind of rebranding and establishing a new identity, right? If that's the case, then just keep the spot in Ashburn, right? And I'm not saying you have to keep it forever because I think that field, that area, that land is worth a ton of money, right? It's got a tremendous value.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I
interject
understand.
real quick to say, like, as I heard Kime saying this last week, there's a chance that they stay in Loudoun County but sell that specific piece of
Right.
land because it's right across from one Loudoun. Like there's a huge amount of tech there, and there's like
Yeah.
fiber wiring and all this kind of stuff that's around. So like that very specific plot of land could be sold for a buku of money that could help
Right.
pay for the new practice facility somewhere, a couple miles away. That's still very close, convenient to, for players to live, et cetera, but allows for them to kind of start over on space as opposed to that very specific, very, very, rich plot of land.
Right. So I think that that's important to say. But let's say hypothetically they wanted to keep it. They do have enough
Mm.
space there to put in a new building. Everyone knows that gross turf field there. You could easily
Yep.
put a building there. Like it would, there's a lot of stuff you can do there. But I do think that selling that spot is probably in the cards at some point because I think it's worth like something insane, in terms of value. But so I think like first location and then identity for that new location. Because as much as Dan wanted, Commander's World to be his thing, like with shopping and all that stuff. Like, I don't know if that's Harris's vision. And if that is the vision, then you got to find enough space to accommodate that, and you want a place where players want to live. I think that's the other thing is all the other places that I played, Atlanta was far away from the stadium. Chicago was far away from the stadium. Houston and San Francisco were kind of the practice facility and the stadium were in the same location. I think there's pros and cons to both. I personally kind of lived like living farther away from the stadium because it kind of lets you have a house, and it was suburbs. The real estate value was better as opposed to being in the city where you're kind of forced to live in a city environment, and that's preference. So whatever he chooses to do, I'm sure the players will be fine with, just as long as the area isn't like a bad area, because I don't want to be raising my kids or sending them to a bad school or whatever. So I think that's what I would kind of just say. Look for a reasonable area that people want to live in, if that's what you want to do. And then, so once that's been determined, I think that's the first step. And then if you get RFK, great. Then you can probably stay in Ashburn or Loudoun County, whatever you prefer. And I think you just kind of move from there. But I think that location element and finding the space to kind of fit your vision for the new stadium is going to be really important. And obviously that goes hand in hand with the RFK thing.
Yeah, definitely. To me, RFK is the best site. Just geographically, it's at the center. It's fairly accessible. It's accessible by metro. Obviously, there's infrastructure in place from the fact that there's been a stadium there before. Like there's giant parking lots. There is the fields at RFK now. There's kind of that like rec area in the shadow of the stadium. I don't know if they would keep that, whether they would be like, oh, we need that space back from our parking lots. I don't know exactly how the logistics of that would go, but I'm sure
we're not engineers. We're not architects, right? But like there is space there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But what I can say is like the fact that there's a metro line right there, that's great for those of us that live in the district and could get there. And it also like helps with traffic, obviously, and all that kind of stuff when you have, and I would assume they would go like a more of a 50,000 seat kind of thing as opposed to a 70, 80,000 seat stadium.
That's the way people are going now. Like, isn't the one in Las Vegas is kind of like that? It's like 60,000.
Yeah.
50,000,
I mean,
like
Seattle was the model for that. Where it's like, wow, if we do 50 and we pack it out, like, and there's also some cool acoustic stuff in Seattle that makes it so specifically loud, like the way the stands are built and the sound bounces.
Yeah.
It's very cool. And you could obviously try to recreate some of that. But if 50,000 people don't have to drive to the game, then your traffic situation's a lot better. Like it's still going to be messy. Right. But it's accessible from Maryland. It's accessible from Virginia. It's accessible from DC, as opposed to like if they build this thing in Dumfries, then, getting there is going to suck unless you live in Dumfries. Like, okay, cool. It's more convenient for the fans that live in southern or central Virginia to come up from Richmond. But like, you alienate your Maryland fan base.
And also like, I think this is like the Washington team, and so I think you want it kind of centrally located. I mean, to that.
I mean, you can talk about the specific of like Dumfries is the equivalent of what they have in San Francisco. Like
it's like on the same area. It's like
because Santa Clara is a solid 45 minutes south of San Francisco.
I think it's more than that. It's San Jose is 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on traffic. Like it's a good little ways, and
so if you live in Marin County now we're getting into Bay Area geography, but like if you live in Marin or Oakland, east or north of the city of San Francisco, like getting down to Santa Clara is awful.
Yeah.
And if there was a team that was in north of, San Francisco, like over time, you're probably leaking some of your fan base to that team.
And so I will say, like when that stadium was built, I'm glad you brought that up because I had just gotten there maybe a year or two after. They were having a really hard time selling tickets to that stadium. Like they had just been pretty good, maybe 2 or 3 years prior. They'd moved the stadium. They thought everyone was going to kind of travel down with them, and they just didn't. Like the hardcore fans didn't come down there because they upped the seat prices and they wanted to make it feel like more of a corporate environment. And so again, like those are decisions that the Harris Group has got to make: is what kind of feel do you want the stadium to have? And so, obviously, like that, I think that'll impact the location too. Do you want it near like kind of new money and have it kind of be a wine and cheese crowd as opposed to a beer and brats crowd? Because like maybe then this Loudoun County stadium idea isn't a bad idea. You make a small stadium, ticket prices are crazy. Businesses buy seats as kind of like, this is where we take clients for business meetings and stuff. And again, that's just a totally different feel. But again, those are the types of the decisions that are kind of looming, in lieu of the new stadium.
Yeah. Well, the thing I was going to say too, with like the geography element is like, do you really want to alienate Maryland? Because the Ravens are there now. And like, if you're a kid growing up who never gets to go to a game, because it's an hour and a half to the Commander's site in Dumfries, and it's 45 minutes to M&T Bank to go watch Lamar Jackson, presuming that he's still there. I don't know, like convenience becomes a factor at some point. And if you're a parent, like, yeah, you could be a diehard fan, but like your kids going to school with half Ravens fans, half Command, like all that kind of stuff. So I think that the more centrally located you can be, the better. And obviously there's that probably also leads to practice facility somewhere else. You could do the practice facility in Landover too, because they own that land, presuming that's a part of the sale. That Dan isn't going to keep that land for some reason. But presuming that, and he shouldn't, because that's where they're going to have to play till like 2027 at least anyway, with FedEx. So I would, that from a convenience standpoint, in terms of getting to the stadium, Landover would make a lot of sense to build a practice facility out there. I just don't know in terms of like a quality of life thing. I think players would much rather live in, all due respect to our friends in Maryland, but and specifically that like neighborhood, but the quality of life and everything is going to be a lot better out in Loudoun County, where guys live now compared to if they moved everything to Landover.
That was something that I was talking to one of my buddies in Miami, and they have a stadium like in the city, and the practice facility is kind of nearby, but everyone lives like 45 minutes away and drives in because the area directly around the stadium is not.
Yeah, Hard Rock Stadium's in a weird spot.
Yeah, not overly nice. So I think, I don't know if that's going to affect anybody long term, but I as a player personally, I want to live relatively close to the practice facility and feel very like, oh, I can get to work whenever I need to get to work. And I know not everyone feels that way, but that's something that I hope they consider with the new location.
Yeah, definitely. So my based off nothing prediction is that the RFK site's going to be worked on. There will be like other stuff that is there. I think they're also, I'll say this too. I've heard, variations of this floated as well, that they could do something at the RFK site similar to what they have at the Star, and in Frisco, which Dallas's facility, where you have the big stadium, but you also have a practice facility that serves as kind of a multi-use, like you have a small stadium basically as well, right? And could you host high school football there? Could you have exhibition type of events there? Could the Washington Spirit play there? NWSL, like you get another pro team involved, or like if they build tennis courts or something, like
sure.
have, the annual tennis event that comes through, like some kind of, you talk about like the village environment where it's not necessarily, they do have a mall at Frisco. But like I've heard that bantied about as well, that you have kind of a multi-purpose thing. You have a practice facility in terms of an actual field or fields that also then is used for actual competitions. And it's kind of like a 10,000 or smaller seat stadium, that where like in Texas, the way they do it is the high school football championships are played there every year. Could you do something like that? And I've heard that bantied about as well. So there's a lot of options. Obviously, as Josh Harris takes over, he'll be asked about all this, and there's a lot of government red tape that has to be specifically for that site cut through as well. They've got to get permission, then they got to buy it, and then they have to build on it, or get a lease and then go on it. And then in terms of the actual construction, like they're going to be at FedEx for a while anyway. That's another thing to think about. Last thing we'll talk about real quick is kind of just putting a bow on the Snyder era. And I wanted to specifically ask you this. As a player who is playing for the organization as things kind of really turned, because the first decade was obviously frustrating as could be of Snyder's ownership. And then all of a sudden in 2012, this magic season happens. You're part of that team. And then it so quickly falls off. And it seems like the frustration turned to vitriol and then turned to apathy very quickly. And just the fan base either was like, I hate this. This is garbage. And this guy is terrible. And we're never going to win as long as he's here. Or that same thought, but instead of I hate this, it's like, I don't care anymore. What was it like to be a player and kind of feel that high of 2012 and then feel the fan base turn on the outside as your career continued?
Yeah, I mean, ever had playing football. Like it was fantastic. Like the fans in the city were just so supportive of the team, and it was just a glimpse of what what this market can be. And I think that's super exciting. And I'm really glad that I was a part of it. And then, I do feel in some kind of crazy way, somewhat kind of responsible for the downcline, because ultimately, like, I think if you win football games, right? If you win football games, the fans stay around, right? If you win playoff games, the fan base stays strong, the fan base stays loyal. And I felt like, in a weird way, like I was a part of the teams that kind of started that downturn. And, this organization went through some pretty bad luck in terms of the Alex Smith thing, the Kirk Cousins trade, all that kind of stuff, and then not being able to get a healthy quarterback. I don't think I understand that is that is not necessarily something you can control. And so, like, if Alex Smith is healthy and plays 3 years of football and they make the playoffs 2 years in a row, are we talking about the same type of complete meltdown here in Washington? Like, I don't know. And it's a hypothetical, obviously, but so I think, yeah, like I want them to win games, like this team to win games badly. I think the fan base here deserves that. It was so cool, Craig, to be there that Dallas game in 2012 to clinch the playoffs, and that place was electric. The fans were electric. You'd go to the grocery store and people were proud to be Washington football team fans, and that has just not been the case in the 10 years since I've left. So hopefully we can they can get back to there. And obviously they got to start making good football decisions and hire the right coaches, hire the right people. And I'm not saying Ron's not that guy, because I think Ron's perfectly capable of doing that. He's done it before in his past. But I do think that those are some things, like, as much as the team ownership is a huge thing, and that title changing hands is a big deal, I think they got to start making some good decisions and giving these guys the support that they need to win games. Because ultimately, I think if you're trying to get back to that level, like, you got to win. You got to win games.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how Harris comes in, and, like, does he try to find the Daryl Morey of the NFL? Like, does he just find the best executive in the league and be like, I'm going to pay you a bunch of money, you're going to come here? And how does that jive with Ron or without Ron, depending on how this first season goes, and kind of the very analytics heavy approach and all those kinds of things. And like you said, like, the football and winning and losing is ultimately going to matter the most. But I do think there will be a bit of a honeymoon. And, people are going to be excited. Like, I anticipate their first game being played on Sunday or Monday Night Football. My guess is they probably hype it up with the Cowboys. And for the first time in a while, it's going to feel like FedEx has a gigantic home field advantage on game one. But like you said, like, over time, the way that's going to sustain, the way you're going to keep that stadium as full as possible, the way it's going to not be filled with road fans is winning. But
and I think the other thing is, it doesn't even need to be crazy winning. It needs to be like getting to the playoffs, like standing tall, walking into the playoffs, and maybe getting a win in a playoff game. Like, think about how crazy this city would be. Everyone's been upset about the name change, and I get it. The nostalgia associated with it, all that kind of stuff, the decline of the organization. But I guarantee you win a playoff game here, and this city's on fire in a good way. And I hope that happens, man, because I think that would be outstanding for everybody involved.
Totally. And you combine that with the fact that you don't anticipate any more, like, Washington Post stories dropping about terrible things. Like, there will be some, like, they're not done, right? Like, I would anticipate at least one more story from Don Van Natta from ESPN. I would anticipate, or the Washington Post doing, obviously, more reporting on the Mary Jo White report when it comes out, on these federal investigations. Like, we're not out of the woods on that stuff. But the difference is, like, when he's no longer in charge, it's like, okay, we can consume that story without the kind of moral conundrum of, okay, well, is it still okay for me to root for the team? Yeah. Like, because he doesn't own it anymore. And I think that's huge, obviously, for the fan base. And there's been so many of those moments over time, from before you were playing to, during, and, some of them were more football adjacent than others. Like, obviously on the non-football adjacent, you have, like, Snyder suing fans for season ticket deposits that they couldn't repay during the recession. Like, I went through a lot of those moments in the monologue that I did on the show last week that we put out in the bonus episode. So if you want kind of the full recap, you can listen to that, or, go on the internet and find the compilations of them. There's a lot, but there's also, like, the kind of, what you were not necessarily in the middle of, but you were at least caught in the shrapnel of like the fight between Snyder, RG, and the Shanahans. And it's like, I would imagine the frustration fans felt at the time, maybe it's a little different with hindsight, seeing how everybody's careers panned out. But, like, I can't imagine like thinking like, oh, we've got this Hall of Fame coach, you've got his son who's this hotshot offensive coordinator, and we have this quarterback who just won Rookie of the Year, and like they're all fighting each other. Like, what are we doing here? And so, hopefully under stronger leadership, you also avoid those kinds of situations. They happen in the NFL, but that just so boiled out of control. Like I look at that as like one of the key kind of points in the Snyder era when you look back, and one that really kind of encapsulates what it was like to be a fan during it.
Absolutely. And I will say, like I mentioned that I played for a couple different teams, and the media here, because it was my first team I was with, obviously in the NFL, it was just like, it's relentless. It's a relentless group of people. They're always looking for stuff to talk about. And that's the job, like we're doing the same thing right now. So
Sure.
no harm, no foul there. But the type of stuff you're talking about was just always like, it was. And then I go to like, Chicago, and that's, they were a pretty big market, right? Chicago's a pretty big market. And it was just like, yeah, hey, who's your favorite linebacker of all time? Oh, that's great. Who's your best friend on the team? It was just so different having those conversations, as opposed to like, hey, like, how do you feel about the name change? How do you feel about Robert? How do you feel about Mike? How do you feel about, Kyle saying this? And you're just like, whoa, like it was a constant deluge of just stuff to navigate and talk about, and just became really, really challenging. So I do think that will be good. It's funny, like I was talking to someone on the football side when I first got here, and how overwhelmed they were, because it was just after like another story. I forget what it was, one of the legal things. He was like, man, like we just don't have time to talk or think about football the same way as we do in other markets, because there's all this stuff here. So I'm kind of hoping, kind of to your point, that when Dan leaves, some of those issues go with him, and the fans can kind of say focus on the team, and the guys on the football side can also say focus on the team, because I think that's super important too, right? Is that like when you get an exasperated coach just being like, I don't know how, like we're talking about this other thing all the time. And then it was like, and then I remember talking to him, and then the next week another story broke, and it was just like this constant thing of just navigating stuff that is unrelated to football. And hopefully that's moving on now, and that's done. And again, if all that stuff kind of clears, you get a more effective management style, you get people making better decisions higher up, you get more investment in stuff, and you don't have to talk about things not related to football. What kind of product could you get here from this staff even? And I think that's something that's really important, and it gets me kind of excited, and I think it should get fans excited. It's just that they're stepping into a new phase, everybody here, even if they've been around for a couple of years, because like I think there was this huge albatross of all this other unrelated football stuff and football related stuff, drama, so to speak, that made it really hard to do your job here.
Yeah. When we talk about closing the book on the Snyder era, that brings up the question of a rebrand. Not that we're going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but I do think it's an interesting thought for a couple of reasons. One, I don't get the sense that Commanders was the most popular name as they did all the testing. I'll put it that way. But I do get the sense that the owner, who's on his way out, really wanted Commanders. And so if you can get a better name, it seems like something that's worth at least exploring. And you might not have to do all of the research again, because you did it. You just listened to it better this time. Better in quotation marks. So that's one thing. I do think that, Kym has mentioned that you have to wait 5 years
I
to
heard
do
that,
it.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I do think you have a little bit of time, right? And if 5 years from now you are moving into a new stadium, you haven't really had the success that you want yet. Because, like, look, if they go 3 years from now and somehow Sam Howell's incredible and they win a freaking Super Bowl, they're not changing the name.
I mean,
and
shoot, even if they win a playoff game, man, like you think about it, if
Right.
you win a playoff game and it's trending the right direction, you got a couple winning seasons, like you're the Commanders now,
right.
in my opinion.
I know, totally agree. But if for whatever reason you haven't yet, you kind of continued and you haven't quite dug out of the hole, you're still making your changes, and now all of a sudden you're about to go into a new stadium and you feel confident that you can get the name that you want, you've done the IP work or whatever, then I think I don't think it's unreasonable. The other option, I wonder if, because obviously there was a way for them to go from the old nickname to Washington Football Team to Commanders. Like, would they go back to Washington Football Team on some kind of temporary basis? And then
I like that better personally, but
I do
might be a
too. Like,
minority there.
I would consider it and be like, all right, we're going to be the Washington Football Team. And then,
I just like that as the name, like just
right. And tell like Goodell and whoever else is in the decision-making process, like, look, we're going to do this temporarily for now, but like if we have the success we think we are, like that's just going to be us from now on. Like we're with the option to become permanent, if you will. But I don't know where you are on the potential for a rebrand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just in terms, if I'm Josh Harris, like, am I thinking about it? Yeah. Is it like high on my list of priorities? Like, probably not. Like I'm thinking about the stadium, I'm thinking about the practice facility, thinking about re-engaging the community of fans. And I understand like you want a name that people like and are excited about, but like and this is just maybe how my brain works. I don't really care. Like I don't really care about the name of a team. I want them to be good at football. Like
Yes.
if I'm a fan. So like how do I prioritize that stuff as opposed to kind of the superfluous other stuff that name, branding, colors, jerseys. I get fans want that to be cool, but like, the New England Patriots, like teams that win, they get something to them, and it's like,
how good is any particular team name anyway? Like, is Patriots really that genius?
Yeah, as Patriots, and it's like the Steelers. Like, I get it, but like you like them because they've been successful, and it's
like, iconic because of what they've done, not because of the word. I do think Commanders is particularly clunky. Like, it's way too long. It doesn't fit on gear. Like, there's no good shortened nickname. People like to joke about the commies, or I'll go Mando sometimes, but like, there's not like there's a lot of problems with it. But if you win, and it's fine. I do think I agree with you that Washington Football Team is better. And if they don't win a lot and they're going into a new stadium and they could kind of restart it all at once. And the other thing that I've heard that I like as a very good point is it kind of puts a bow on the Snyder era where it's like, it's over. It's behind us. We're not talking about it again. And I could see the value in that as well.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I totally get that 100%. If I'm a new guy, maybe that's something I want to prioritize. But again, like, just where is it in the hierarchy of needs? And I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
Ending the Dan thing, but is it high on my list if I'm the new guy? Probably not. It's just my perspective, but I'm not Josh Harris, and he might feel differently about it.
Right. All right. Last thing, I thought of another question that we didn't put in our list of potential questions, but I want to run this by you real quick, and it's football adjacent, or not even football adjacent. It's football. So Harris in Philadelphia hires Daryl Morey, first he hires Sam Hinkie, and they go through the process
with the Sixers. Like, you're saying,
giant,
right?
Yeah,
just so people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Harris, who also owns the NBA's Philadelphia 76ers, when he took over, he greenlit the process as it's been known, which was basically a giant intentional tank job because in the NBA, the roster building needs to have a star player. If you don't have one of the 6 best players on the planet, you're never winning a championship. That's the nature of the NBA. It's very different than the NFL, where like the closest thing you might have to that is a star quarterback, and the Ravens won with Joe Flacco. Like, and there's plenty of stories throughout NFL history, right? So he was like, this is the best way to win. We're going to go full bore towards that. They used a very analytics-based approach in terms of how they played. It helped shape the style. It helped shape who they took from like a roster building standpoint, all that kind of stuff. The analytics movement in the NBA is, I would say, more advanced. And also basketball is a more analytics friendly game than football is. There's so many more variables in football, including the fact that you have, over double the amount of players on the field at one time. Right. Like, that's just more factors, downs, distances, as opposed to kind of the free flowing nature of a basketball game that is generally divided into pretty clean offensive and defensive possessions. Long wind up. Point is, if Harris takes an analytical approach to team building, or hires an executive that takes an analytical approach to team building, to building a style of play, what does that look like? And is there anybody in the league that you think now does a good job of kind of being forward thinking and using a lot more data than has been traditionally used in the league?
Oh man, I wish I would have had time to look this up, but I don't have any off the top of my head for that first part. But in terms
we can circle back to this for sure next week. or in the future when we've had a little more time to dig in. But I just thought of it and I thought it was interesting, and
No,
it's something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about.
it's a really good question. And so, yeah, what I would say is that if I'm trying to build a team and I want immediate success, I think this roster's close. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I think it's close. And we've talked about some of the issues that I have with the group. Is the offensive line, plus offensive line, maybe can it be elevated with play calling? Sure. You're looking for another playmaker on the defense, linebacker, corner, whatever it is, right? So I think, you have a good draft this year, maybe even closer. But what I would say, if I'm trying, and this year is especially interesting, I think, for this question, because Caleb Williams is going to be the first pick next year, probably. Everyone that I've talked to in the scouting world is, it's so funny. We were talking about these quarterbacks at the combine, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, all these guys, and everyone kept bringing up Caleb Williams, like, at nauseum. And I was like, and they were like, he is Michael Jordan. And so, for your point about kind of the rebuild, you need a franchise player. Maybe that's your franchise quarterback next year. Maybe that's that dude. And so if I'm forward thinking about that, I'm going to try, if I'm the new GM coming in this offseason, probably starting right when I get in, to trade something so that I have 2 first-round picks for next year. Because I want to give myself the ability to trade up for Caleb Williams. And think about it. Everyone talks about rebranding, all this stuff. Nothing rebrands better, in my opinion, than a starting, franchise quarterback. And
Right.
what I mean by that is he's the face of your team. He's going to do interviews. He's going to be all over the place. He's going to do shampoo commercials, all that kind of stuff. I want to make sure I have that opportunity. So there's a couple guys on the roster that I think you could move to give yourself that opportunity. Most of them are on the defensive line. So, keep an eye on this year. He won't be here. The owner or the new GM won't be in time to implement this policy. But if I'm the GM, I'm probably drafting a defensive lineman at 16. I'm looking if Sweat has any trade value to get me into something that I've got. If I am going Caleb Williams here, if that's what I'm trying to do, trying to get first round draft capital, first and a high second, and say, hey man, we have tools now to say we can move up and draft the Michael Jordan of next year's draft. And I know that's a year away. That seems crazy, but we're talking about building a team. And then all of a sudden you've got a pretty good roster with an excellent quarterback on a rookie deal. And you say, let's let it rip. And if I'm Josh Harris, if I'm this group, that's something I'm definitely considering, but you need to move a piece. It just depends on which piece that is. And if you can get enough value for it to kind of, I might even trade 2 players. I'll be like, here are these 2 players for a first round pick or a first and a second next year. Let's see if we can get it going. Like that's how important that would be. And I think that this year, that question for this year is especially significant because of the 2 quarterbacks in next year's draft.
Yeah. By the way, that is Gonzaga College High School's Caleb Williams.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he's a DC guy. So talk about the potential for him to be a star here.
Yeah.
I'm almost always wary of that, like the hometown.
me
like
too.
it worked with LeBron. Outside of that,
he's a unique guy. Right?
Yeah, how many guys have been drafted to their hometown team, and it's like, I mean, Derrick Rose, it worked for a little bit, and then it very much didn't. And there's been some success in moderate levels, but it definitely. There's also the scarring here of, like, obviously Dwayne, who was a local kid and didn't work out, but Caleb Williams is a different kind of prospect. So that's interesting. And certainly would go counter the way that the team has been run this offseason. But I don't think it's a crazy idea at all. I think it's actually a really smart idea. And had the new ownership been in place in, let's say, January, I do wonder how different everything looks.
Yeah, I think that process could have started this year, assuming you think one of these guys is a franchise changing guy. And I'm in the boat that is leaning, like I'm in the Bryce Young boat. I don't know if I'm fully committed to say he's going to change your franchise.
Yeah, I'm in starting it in terms of planning ahead for next year.
I see. Yeah, but I'm saying even like maybe you make a move, you move up to draft, Richardson or whatever. You start that process now. But I do think it works better going into 2024, right? Is that right? Yeah. 2024. So I think that, again, like that's something that I would kind of this season, keep an eye on when that GM gets here, when they start planning stuff out. Because if you think he's that dude, like I'm going to try and get because again, I look at Philly and I think Philly's just done such a great job in terms of team building. They always have 2 first-round picks. They've done a great job of that. And because it gives them the ability to say, hey, man, here's 2 firsts. We're going to switch spots with you. Let's get up there and get that guy we want to get. And so, yeah, I think that would be something analytically I would do. And especially you see And the other thing with analytics guys, especially in the NFL now, is I think they are decreasing the value of first-round draft picks. So do you trade that first-round draft pick for a franchise quarterback? Like, would they be in the Lamar sweepstakes this year? I think more likely so than the guys in there now.
Yeah. I will say this about Williams. If he's actually that dude, I don't know that, like, if you think he's Peyton Manning,
yeah,
would you trade 7 first-round picks? Like, I'm saying, like, if you're the team, like, would you, someone calls you and is like, I will give you 7 first-round picks so that I can go to 1 and take Caleb Williams. Would you tell them no?
What do you mean?
If you're really like, Caleb Williams is Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
Like,
I mean,
that's so invaluable. Like, I just don't know the feasibility of trading up to that first pick. Like, you can't possibly know, like, with 100% certainty.
I think that's the problem. That's the thing. I immediately had that thought. I was like, if you know that this is Peyton Manning, the guy,
he goes out, he has every bit of a year that you think he can for USC, he wins the Heisman, he's incredible, he's far and away the number 1 pick, and you're 100% sure he's going to the Hall of Fame.
I think the highest I would go is 4. The highest I would go. I wouldn't go 7, but I would.
But, like, my point is, if you're the Texans, they're probably it's not. Let's say the Texans, right, exactly. Like, if you're the team with the number 1 pick, what trade is an acceptable terms where you're giving up the chance to take that guy? And I just don't know what that trade is.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, that's a great point.
So it does get funky. It does get hairy. But I think the idea of, like, being willing to give stuff up and having some flexibility to go get a guy is well put. It's just like, if he's that guy, I don't know.
You're saying that they might not be willing to.
Yeah, I don't know what the price is going to be, and I don't know that there is a price.
Well, you just hope you hope you get the Chicago Bears from this year in the spot. Right. They got a young quarterback. I mean, that'd be tough, man.
Yeah, God, Carolina has Bryce Young. He has a good year, but it's
not great. Yeah,
they're not taking Williams, but they're willing to take your 4 first rounders.
Right.
That's kind of what you need. All right, that was a fun little football end. Wednesday. Huge show. Should have mentioned this off the top. We are doing a crossover episode with Brian Baldinger and Jason Lockenfora. So super pumped about that. That is the Wednesday/Thursday pod in your audio feeds Thursday morning. We're looking forward to that. Next week, mock draft 2.0/final.0 as the draft is coming up on Thursday. So Monday, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the most Commanders players in the draft. So that's our plan for Monday, and then we'll do a mock draft that'll come out the morning of the draft on Thursday. So that's the plan. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're watching or listening right now. And for Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.